Hey there, it's intuitive and astrologer Robert Ohado. Now, if you've followed me for a while, you know it's been a minute. It's been about 3 months since I've actually done a live stream. And I'll explain a little bit about that later, but I am here for this particular video to talk all about our current cycle of Venus retrograde in Aries and Pisces. Look, I know, believe me, I know. We have been going through it. I don't care where you live in the world. I don't care what your politics are. We've all been going through it. And the truth is, we're going to go through some more. Now, if you have been feeling powerless lately, if you've been feeling like you're mentally scattered and it's such an effort to focus, and then next thing you know, you're doom scrolling instead of focusing on something that you know you need to get done. If you're feeling shaky in some of your relationships, if you're feeling shaky with your family and it's like your family history just suddenly decided to make a comeback, if you've been struggling with finances or worried about finances or the economy, if you're wondering, are you going to be okay? If you are starting to feel like every day you begin upright, like you get out of bed and it's like, okay, the sun's out, life's all right, I got this, but by noon, you're flattened. It's like, no, I do not have this. And I don't know what is going to happen next. Am I going to get through this chaotic time? If you feel like as the world shakes like it does right now, if you feel like, hey, I'm constantly triggered and I can't seem to stop that, I can't seem to get ahead of the chaos inside of me, let alone the chaos outside of me, and the chaos outside of me is causing the chaos inside of me. If you've been feeling like this onslaught of nonstop bad news is taking you out, rocky on the ropes, you don't know what am I going to do here? Well, let me just tell you, if any of this is tracking, if any of this feels a little familiar to you, you're in the right place, because I'm here to tell you that there are astrological, energetic, archetypal, and just co-creative and karmic reasons for what we are all going through right now, what you are going through right now. And here's the good news. Turning toward my favorite intuitive tool, astrology, we need to look no further, really, than our current cycle of Venus retrograde to get some mooring, some guidance, and some empowerment in what is going on. And here's even more good news. The cycle itself contains in it, this Venus retrograde in, by the way, 2 signs, Aries and Pisces. This cycle contains soul, SOULUTIONS, out of which I'm going to be bringing to you a soul, SOLE-lution, because there's really one thing. I mean, as I was getting ready to talk about this cycle, and it's taken me a while, I'm a little late to the game. I mean, Venus went retrograde just about 3 days ago. Normally, I'm a little bit ahead of the game here, and I get out a video or do a social live or something at least a week in advance. But, you know, I'm in the retrograde as well. And I've actually been in a little bit of a pause phase, just taking a break for myself after 5 really rough years, which I'll probably mention as part of the teaching. But listen, the things that are going on here, there's so many. And I could go into so many things. But when it came down to it, as I was getting ready, there's really one lesson here. If I can give you just one lesson, one, that's going to help empower you to get through this Venus retrograde. And the Venus retrograde is just a symbolic, synchronistic aspect of the greater alchemy in the heavens right now, the greater alchemy of our lives right now. And in it, there is one lesson, one, that I promise will change everything for you. Now, I don't lie, I don't mess around, try not to swear. So you know, if you followed me, I keep it real. And I really do mean this. This is a lesson that's going to take you to your core. So we can all agree about something, right? Why would I be saying this? So let's get on the same page here before we begin, certainly with my approach to astrology. So I think we can all agree that in our journey of life, we're here to learn lessons. Most of you would probably agree that on some level, you have soul agreements, sacred contracts, sacred agreements to evolve and learn and co-create here on planet Earth. Would you agree with that? I mean, if you don't completely agree with that, stay with me. If you definitely don't agree with that, this may not be the video for you, but I'd still tell you to stick around. Because here's the deal. I've been working with astrology for 30 years. And what it has taught me more than anything is that it is an exquisite tool to understand the current lessons we agree to. So said another way, perhaps even a bit more empowering, I want you to consider you were born for these times. You really were. I know I've said this before. And during times like this, it just sounds like, oh, he's just trying to make me feel better. Well, I am trying to make you feel better, but not in ways that aren't true. We really were born for these times. And then the question becomes, well, what is the lesson here? And there's lessons, right? But there's the core lesson I'm going to give you. And it is the lesson of your lifetime. It's the lesson of my lifetime. It's the lesson of our lifetimes. And we just forget it. And then we come back to it as we are now. And then another layer unfolds. Another visceral component of it becomes accessible. And then we find our power. Because here's the deal. What this Venus retrograde is about is that you've been losing your power. I want you to take a minute with that. Where have you been in your life? How have you been feeling? Have you been feeling empowered? Have you been feeling like, hey, I got this. I got these challenges. This mountain's just fine. I'm not huffing and puffing at all while I climb it. The obstacles collectively in the world, oh, not a problem. Are you feeling that way? I'm not. But I have something that can help you feel that way. And shall I say, Venus retrograde has that. And I'm here just to communicate that to you the best I can through my skill sets. But I want you to get that this is about your power. This is about power. So here's where we are. This is all about, hey, I've been losing my power. And any retrograde, whether it's Mercury, whether it's Venus, they're all here to bring something up in us that has been unconscious and make it conscious. So now let's apply that to power. This Venus retrograde is in part here to make you aware of how you've been unconsciously losing power. And once you become aware of that, you're going to get your power back. And even saying power back maybe is a misnomer, because it could possibly also be true that this is power you've never had, ever. And so let's get into this. Stick around if you are ready to do some shadow work, look under the covers. That's what Venus wants. And everything that is in her domain, which I'll be going through shortly here. So stay with me, because we are going to be talking about how you lost your power and how you can get it back. Okay, let's get into this. So let's start first with some astrological structure to the Venus retrograde cycle itself, because what's wonderful about this kind of structure, not only does it give a little bit of validation to the madness, as I've always found, it also gives context to the timing of it all. And it will help you, as I guide you here, track your personal Venus retrograde in Pisces and Aries message, lessons, etc. So Going way back here a little bit. Now, Venus retrogrades, just so you know, are longer than Mercury retrogrades. I'm going to get into some comparisons there and identify the three-part process of a Venus retrograde and how to understand it. Keeping in mind that this is a Venus retrograde into zodiacal signs, which I'm going to also explain why that's important. But let's start here. On January 28th, 2025, let's go back. This is when the setup phase for this Venus retrograde began. That just simply means that I'm going to bring a graph in here just so you can look at this, as I will be doing a lot throughout this entire video. This just simply means that this is the time when the planet Venus crossed over into the degrees of Pisces that it's going to retrogress all the way back to. So let's look at this right now. This shows you right here exactly what I just said. If you can look at that green line, that's the Venus retrograde cycle itself as it spans over, which is above it, the degrees of the zodiac. So if you look at this, you're going to see that Venus hit 24-ish, 24.5 to be exact, actually, if you want to go that way, degrees of Pisces on January 28th. That's when the setup phase began. Sometimes you'll hear astrologers call this the shadow phase. I like calling it the setup phase, but shadow phase works as well because it is about this phase where what's unconscious in you, perhaps what's in your shadow, is going to start to be triggered up and activated through what? Through synchronicity. What does that mean? It means ever since the 28th of January, there has been situations in your life, and we have to get into a both and mindset here. Pisces, first of all, is a collective sign, is an archetype in the zodiac. What does that mean? It's about, really, it's the final sign of the zodiac. It is the all, the whole entire world, the whole sea of us all is Pisces. So we're in a time anyway as co-creators where we have to really start approaching all cycles, everything in our lives from the consciousness of both and. So what's happening in my life personally is also happening in tandem in some way, in synchronicity with the collective. We're not just individuals that are independent of society and culture. We are interdependent within society and culture, right? Who I can become, who I am, how I feel about myself, and same for you, has always been interdependent upon messages from society and culture and our family and our religions, et cetera, just to give you an example. So when we look back to the 28th, we want to think about, and I think it's always so useful to do this, if you're having trouble tracking the Venus message or energy in yourself, look to the world. So there's been a lot, right? Politically, geopolitically, all across the board in society, all around the world, that deals with lots of Venus themes: value, values, money, finances, economy. Those all are in the domain of Venus to some degree. They share space with, let's say, Taurus, the sign which also rules Venus. And then if we went to politics, Venus rules Libra, which also rules politics to some degree. And then if we went to Capricorn, now we're in a little bit of a different territory with Saturn. But all the same, we are in this moment where since the 28th of January, a lot's gone down. Now, I do want you to track first personally to some degree, look at your relationships as I go through some of what I'm going to say next, and start to sense intuitively, hey, have these been themes? Have these things been coming up? And where are they now? Because Venus has stationed retrograde, right, as of March 1st. And now it's March 5th as I do this social live. We're 4 days into a 40-day journey with Venus retrograde. This is a long retrograde. I'm going to get to its midpoint and all sorts of other stuff later. But for now, I want you to kind of stay in the orb of the setup phase with me and just start to sense in yourself, let your psyche generate information as I ask this question. what's been coming up for you regarding Venus themes ever since the 20th of January. And by themes, how do we know something's a theme? It's consistent. It kind of keeps showing up in our lives in various relationships and synchronicities. And it just kind of, after a while, you start to go, wait a minute, this is like the same thing being reenacted here, there, and everywhere. And that's a theme. So to get more specific with Venus themes and the archetypes involved in this particular setup, we've got to look to Pisces and Aries. So we're going to do that. But for now, just maybe in a more blank slate, let's see what fills in way, I want you to consider what's been coming up for you. What's been coming up for you when it comes to your sense of empowerment and your sense of identity and your sense of your values and your sense of, hey, I feel like I'm being triggered to maybe become a bit of a warrior right now, or yet I kind of just want to hide, and yet I kind of want to go to Fantasyland and be in a Piscean dream world where everything's fine. You feeling me? You feel any of that lately? I mean, all of that lately? So there's been this setting up, an activation, a triggering through synchronicities for all of us that do deal with what's my place in this world? Where's this world going? And I think perhaps more than any Venus cycle I've ever really tracked, and it comes in the times with this whole Pluto and Aquarius activation and Neptune and Saturn in the same degrees of this cycle, by the way. You know, we're really in this time of having to ask personal and collective questions. And this is a time, and I've said this my whole entire career, if you will, or my whole entire career as a teacher for sure. Whatever you're able to do as an individual has always been, will always be, to a great extent, dependent on the collective and historical context you live in. So what I could do or can't do, or can or can't do as a gay man, is dependent on Harvey Milk, Greg Louganis, other people that pioneered before me for my rights, and Matthew Shepard. I could go down the list, and my own empowerment steps and my own journey into self-esteem in a shame-based culture around my identity. And all of that's predicated by, society, culture, and historical context. And it goes for all of us. We're all dependent, interdependent upon, hey, the forces out there. And whenever we're looking at forces out there, the question will always come up around power. What is our power? What is our power to become? And this is Aries, an individual. To have our own unique individual identity and the freedom to have that. So now I'm getting into some of the activations. Have you had activations around what you can and can't do, what you're free to do? Have you felt like, I don't even know if I can make plans? I was going to buy a new car. I was going to move. I was going to do this. I was going to do that. And things have gotten so shaky collectively, I'm afraid to step out the front door. I'm afraid to make a choice, because what about the karmic dominoes that are falling all around? Where does this go? And that's just me referencing what it means to look at a collective power movement and be in it. And then how do you, and this is the whole point of this cycle, keep your power, source power, and move forward somehow. I'm going to get there, I promise you. But I want you to understand the setup phase. And if we look to, for example, obviously very active and on full display in the United States are political challenges within the current administration and government of our country. I'm an American, obviously. You can see this on full display. What does it mean? You know, the power of the people, we the people, when things are being done outside of the Constitution that was there to safeguard the power of the people. Where do we go? What do we do? These are massive questions a lot of people have. And how do we fight, quote unquote, the good fight in our lives for whatever that good fight is for? You might have a good fight you're being called to fight, and you're not even aware of it just yet. And that could be fighting for a marriage. That could be fighting for a friendship. That could be fighting for a relationship. There's many ways this can manifest, from the most personal to the most collective, and I want you to find yourself in it intuitively as I go along here. I'm laying down some structure for you. But as we got to January 28th, the retrograde zone began activating. And then March 1st, Venus stationed retrograde. Now, at the same time, March 1st, just 4 days ago, Mercury, which is going to retrograde in the same exact degrees. Let me show you this. This is the upcoming Mercury retrograde. This is the Venus retrograde. They're almost indistinguishable, the retrograde zones, because they're both hitting pretty much the same retrograde zone. Venus goes a bit further because it's a longer cycle than Mercury. But do you know what else hits the same exact zone of this journey from Pisces to Aries? Neptune and Saturn. There's 4 planets this year crossing this boundary from the very last cycle of the zodiac, last sign of the zodiac, the very last sign of the zodiac, to the very first sign of the zodiac. That alone says this about your life, about life. We're in a time of endings and beginnings. We are in this middle space, and normally I would say liminal, but it actually doesn't feel liminal to me in the normal way. I would use that word, which is kind of like embryonic and kind of just hanging out, because there's a lot going on in this space. And that is because in this space in astrology, this is let's just say it's the 29th degree of Pisces is included, which in astrology is called the anaretic degree. And what that means is it's a degree in which there is this zone opening up. That is a liminal zone, yeah. It's a zone where things are ending and something is in an embryonic way beginning. But it's different this time with 4 planets there. And it's different this time because this is about a massive tectonic level of cycle shift. And the Venus retrograde, now let's micro down to her, is saying, listen, in all of this, the enormity of Neptune and Saturn and this massive shift going on, I am here, Venus, to talk to you about all things that are within my archetype. And what would that be? Well, let's go to myth real quick. Venus, goddess of love. But Aphrodite, which was what the Greeks called her, she wasn't a goddess of love of, like, certainly not codependent love and I just love you and I'm just going to be so, you're right by your side. If we look to the myths of Aphrodite, she was a goddess that was kind of vain, and it was all about her. And it was all about, if I love you, it's to get back to me and validate me. And what that teaches us about this archetype is that this is a force in all of us, and it's not negative or positive per se at all, because we all need a force in us. We all need a Venus in us. It says, I have to have some core sense of how I value me and how I advocate for my sense of value. And I have to have some understanding of how my esteem system operates. And then when it comes to love, yes, love's part of this, because how does our esteem express? Through relationships, through how we relate to both ourselves and other people. This is all in the territory of Venus. It does come down greatly to what we value. Now we're going to do a deep dive into values, because this is the core main theme I'm after and core lesson this cycle's after, I feel. And if we want to just, for now, foreshadow where we're headed, I'm going to say, all right, what are your values? What about your values got activated on the 28th of January? What about your values are activated now? Do you feel like life's kind of cornering you into a truth-telling session around what you really value and why? Because what Venus retrogrades are about are our unconscious values. We can be very assured of our conscious values, right? You might tell me, Robert, I value compassion, kindness, I value generosity, I value honor and integrity, I value reciprocity. And I'm not going to look at you and go, you're lying, because you're not. You're likely not at all. But what Venus will do and is doing is saying, yeah, some of that's a bit of a cover story. Because if I look to your choices, am I going to find what you just said, compassion, integrity, honor, reciprocity, generosity? Am I going to find those values in what you choose? And by the way, on Earth, the primary teacher here is karma. So just know choices always have karma. We kind of know this, right? And whether those choices are conscious or unconscious, the karma is going to still be the karma. So every Venus retrograde actually will bring us into this sense of, all right, why do I choose what I choose? Hold on to that question. I want you to consider that for yourself. What in you chooses what and why? I got an answer, and you're just going to go, oh, duh, shortly here. But I got to set the stage and give the framework a little bit more. So what I want you to understand for now, Venus wants you to understand why and how you've lost your power. And it has everything to do with what I just said. You might not make the connection yet, but we're going to get there. And not only that, how to get your power back or bring new power online, or both and. So this is the classroom. This is the classroom we're in. And when I say, hey, Venus wants to activate this massive lesson about your empowerment, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Your empowerment, meaning where you've lost your power unconsciously, and how you're going to get it back through something to do with the Aries and Pisces archetypes and the lessons that come through that 29th anaretic degree of Pisces, which I'm going to get into a little bit more. So I'm going to bring up the sponsor of this video because I'm going to reference it as another thing to access in more depth on some of the things I'm about ready to say. So the reason why you haven't seen me for a while is in December, I did a massive blowout astrological forecasting guide for 2025. And I was listening to I mean, we're talking 5 sessions, hours and hours of deep dives, and also for the first time, a month to month, quarter to quarter, if you will, play by play, intuitive assessment of what was going to happen and the energies involved. And I listened to the first quarter because I blow out my own circuits when I do these sorts of things. And that's why it takes me a couple months to recover and you don't see me for a while. But the accuracy that I gave in that first quarter made my own jaw drop. And now we're entering the second quarter. So I want everyone, if possible, if it's within your means, to get this guide. It is the sponsor for this video. There is a link in the description. And this just shows you, it comes with a PDF ebook. As you can see, pieces there. It's 40% off until March 13th. That was the sale I had during the holidays. I'm keeping it because I really want to make this accessible. So if you want to get deeper and also have a whole year overview, especially the bigger cycles, this is what you should be maybe thinking about. Just another look at it. Now, the title of this is Using the Darkness to Find the Light. There's a specific reason I named it that has proven absolutely accurate thus far as we enter the year. And I'm just saying to those of you who took this, let's just hope my forecast continues to be accurate because there will be light. However, let me just now come back into, having said that, this rundown of this Venus retrograde cycle. The anaretic degree, as I talked about in depth in that, and that's why I wanted to get that on the map, of 29 degrees Pisces, is occurring, as I said, in the Neptune retrograde, Saturn retrograde, this Venus retrograde, and as I showed you, this Mercury retrograde. Now, that alone as an astrologer makes my jaw drop. And what it says is, on the planet right now, there is something fundamental that we need to get. One, yes, there is an ending here. Make no mistake. If anyone is hoping that somehow we're going to wake up and reverse and go back to some old status quo, I'm just here to tell you that's not going to happen. In fact, I'm going to say, and depending on how you look at it, one could say fortunately or unfortunately that what is ahead is probably darker than you can imagine. But imagine something so dark it changes the whole world. Think of things that have happened in our history that have been that challenging. That is where we are. That is where we are. And that is why this particular lesson that Venus is offering is so crucial. Absolutely. As I was coming into the main thread, which didn't really land until last night, I couldn't stop crying. So get your tissues ready. You might need them. But what I want to offer you about the zone that is this 29th degree, that's in all four of those planetary retrogrades, Neptune, Saturn, Venus, and Mercury, is this. And as I said, I cover this deeper in the guide that I just showed you. I feel like it is a zone of miracles. It is a zone where we get an opportunity to absorb massive karmic lessons and finish them before the next cycle starts of Aries. If we don't do that, then those lessons import into the next cycle greatly. Now, come to your personal life for a sec. I want you to think about anything in your personal life that it's like it's the final confrontation with a ghost from your timeline, the final confrontation of you having to really look at karmic things that you, if you're honest, chose and co-created in part and set in motion. We'll get to the why and how and the values and what's involved in that. Yeah, we're going to get there, but I want you to know this for now. This degree is so important because what it truly is, and I use this as the model for the pattern of what's happening. It's like we're all going through a near-death experience. Now I want you to think of the pattern of a near-death experience. And this, in Venus, in this cycle, is the near-death experience of your values and how your values translate and express in choices. And why? Why do you have the values you have? Question I want you to put on the side. Why do you have the values that you have? Where do they actually come from? Now, what do I mean by near-death experience? I mean, when there's a near-death experience, what happens is, and I've studied this since I was 19. My very first book on this was Betty Eadie's book, and it had me bawling. It was so profound, and I've been a student of this since then. And I have a story to share with you later that I'll finish this off with something that happened to me on voting day that I've not shared yet. But I want you to understand, in a near-death experience, the pattern typically is the person dies physically. Their soul, spirit leaves their body. They're usually met by a being, whether that's Christ, an angel, a loved one that's already passed on. And then they're given usually a quick life review of all the choices they've made, the impact those choices had on both them and everyone around them. And it's so quantum that they experience how everyone felt in this indescribable way we can't as humans from the choices and situations that they created and how they affected other people in this near-death experience in life review. That happens. And yet they don't fully cross over, right? They come back. But when they come back, a lot of the time, they're left with the awareness of the impact of every choice, the intentionality in the choices and how that was a huge factor, and the values and things in play behind the choices made. And they usually come back very reformed in a way where they want to tell everyone about what they saw so that we, while we're here on this side of the classroom, can benefit and then become kinder, more light-filled, gracious, loving human beings. I would sum it up and say that most people that have experienced near-death experiences, they come back with this mantra: make your life about love. That is the lesson. Make your life about love. When I say that, I just spoke within the domain of Pisces. Pisces as an archetype, as a zone of creation, is the zone of the soul. It's the zone of God, the zone of the divine. You want to call it goddess, it's all of it. It's the ineffable, it's the indescribable, it's the magic, it's the miracle. It is all of life and all of creation. It is the cosmos and the dimensions of all of it itself. That's the sign Pisces on one level. Keep that in mind, because we're coming back to that. But this 29th degree, this anaretic space, is about us all being in a year to year and a half of entering into the pattern of a near-death experience. So in the pattern, one is given vision, soul vision, S-O-U-L, in a way that the distorted ego identities of our personality and how they distort how we see they're just not part of what's seen because they've been left behind just for a brief moment while we cross over. Now, let me turn this around and let's use this as an instruction. The instruction is this: we need to enter into the Venus cycle and the entire 2025 year, and also part of 2026, with a conscious intentionality of engaging a near-death experience. We need to go, hey, I need to cultivate consciously a way to get beyond my ego identities, and track with me, I'm laying crumbs here, and their values, to something of higher and greater value, and something of the mystery of life, and something of the soul. I've got to find a way there. The life and the classroom of life depends on it. Just resonating? If you now take what I just said, looked back at your retrograde setup phase and went, wait a minute, has life been happening in such a way, personally, socially, familially, culturally, collectively, in such a way that I'm being asked to let go of this identity, this way of thinking, that way I see myself, and the value sets of these identities are others as well. Can you see that? Other people are being asked this question. Hey, what are the values of your soul? Hold on to that question. That's a Pisces question. Now, the zone of the anaretic degree is, yes, a near-death experience. It's also a zone of miracles. It's a zone where we can, as people do in near-death experiences, look at the karmic chessboard and the karmic formula of our lives and go, this produces these painful things. The way I've been living in my human ego identities and making choices, it produces this on the planet. In my life, I just felt quantumly, holographically, how I made everyone feel. The person I bullied, the person I demeaned, the person I lied to. I got to see my system as I told a lie or believed a lie or was under a spell and made a decision out of low worth, out of tribal identities and tribal ego identities and tribal political identities, I got to see in this near-death experience the holographic karmic effect on people, the ripple, and the values that I thought were my power. And here I'm looking at them, and they have no power at all. That's the Venus retrograde. So it is a time where personally, you, me, we are being called to go, wait a minute, I've got to know my values, but not in the way I usually psychologically engage this revelatory process of what are my real values? What's authentic? It's not going to cut it. I got to go near-death experience alchemy on this. Because the question this retrograde's asking you and me and everyone, what are the values of your soul? Now, the setup phase, what it did was it brought things up to trigger, for many of us, a lot of identities and archetypes in us that maybe aren't so soul-centered. And that's totally fine. Let's bring compassion to the messiness of being human. Because that's part of what's also, I think, being triggered here is you value compassion? Show me how. How? You value kindness? Show me how. You value honesty? Show me how. And if it helps you, get an image of your near-death experience angel asking you these questions with love, not judgment, like, hey, well, show me how. Because your lessons are yours. Your karma is yours. Our karma, though, is ours. And we are under task, as I named in my main masterpiece here, to use the darkness of this year to find the light. But what is the light to you? What does the light mean? Do you live in the values of the light? Or do you live in the values of a political virus? Is another question. I'm going to riff around, and you take what you need as medicine, as a spiritual direction, as co-creative direction from what I say whenever it hits and pains you. You got a relationship where you got to ask, well, I kind of really, if I'm honest, Robert, I want to get even, get some revenge up in here around so-and-so and what they did. And I want to kind of not really look at what I did or how I co-created a certain dynamic in a relationship or what my role was. I think I want to scapegoat. I think I want to blame. I think I want to play victim. And it's all okay. As I always teach, everything's okay. However, just know there's always karma for it. There's always karma for it. So if you were out of your body at this moment in time with your angel doing a life review on your entire life, but let's just micro down to the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. And let's just know your angel's seeing through any bullshit. That's just what's up. I mean, you can play your games and put up your fronts and put on your identities and masks and try to, your angel's going, we're not gonna change your karma or change your life or light up the world here with this. I mean, do you, but we're not going to. So this is what the 29th degree overall offers. Now, in the Mercury retrograde, it's going to do something different than the Venus. And if you want to join me for when I talk about that, I want to share with you, I will be doing this Sunday an event that's going to include quite a bit of stuff. It's called the 2025 second quarter astrological check-in, finding your power within the cosmic state of the union. And it's going to be a live stream event, 4 hours. It will be post-edited into 2 to 3 parts, and it's going to cover a lot. I'm going to go deeper into this Venus retrograde in Aries Pisces with guidance for all sun signs. Then I'm going to look at the eclipses that are coming up, the full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 13th. I'm going to look at, as I just said, the Mercury retrograde in Aries Pisces, which is coming up and starts on March 15th. I'm going to look at the new moon solar eclipse in Aries, which is March 29th. And also, just so in case you're not aware of this, we're in a Mars retrograde integration phase. So I'm going to give guidance on how to handle that. And that's all coming up. There's a link in the description of this video. That's all coming up this Sunday. And I'm also going to look at something, which I'm not going to cover too much here, which is the Venus's golden ratio section, which literally cycles of Venus create this around as it goes around with the Earth. We're going to talk about what that means. For now, I will tell you this about this and bring it in because I think it's appropriate to bring it in right now. I've got you in the setup phase so far. Now, I also want you to think about as the retrograde progresses and also as it relates to the setup phase, because this deals with the golden section. And that is a unique pattern that Venus makes, as you just saw, that's really a pentagram through its cycles of retrogression. And Venus goes retrograde about every 1.5 years. And then over a span of years, it creates this in the sky. And then what we do with the golden section is we look back like 8 years and we think, where are the themes that are current right now? Where can I look back 8 years ago and sense and see that they were coming up then too? And that this is an evolutionary next dynamic that's in play now, that a thread of 8 years ago is also being recruited into the fold. So I'm going to let you kind of play with that. We'll do more work with that on this Sunday. But for now, let's get to the main thread and let's keep going because I'm not done yet. So to understand this Venus retrograde a little deeper, let's come back to, all right, what is Venus as a force in us? And let me ask it in a very holistic way. And in a way where I can ground this for you, because here's the way I work with astrology. For me, astrology is not something up in the sky we look at and then we just talk about it through adjectives and timing and just get the adjectives of signs together. And I don't do that. And if that's the kind of astrology you like, that's totally fine. I had someone recently negatively comment on my approach to astrology in a way where I thought, wait a minute, anyone can be with whatever version, if you will, of astrology they want to, but my way of working with it is why I'm on this earth, to share. I'm on this earth to share this version of it. So what my version is about is astrology is what we live. And it is really the Earth's astrology. It's Gaia's astrology because it's her orientation to the living energy pattern of the solar system, her creative role in that pattern, and we're fused to the matrix here of her. These are her cycles. And we have soul agreements to work within these cycles as if they were classrooms of growth, of learning. Classrooms where we learn about co-creation. Can we change the weather? No. We're not here to learn that. We're here to learn how to work within the weather, i.e. cycles, astrology, astrological archetypal cycles, in ways that honor the gravity of all creation. And that gravity is holism. All is one. So if you're going to ask yourself, and it's a great question to bring up in this Venus retrograde, what is the end game of any astrological cycle? But how about this Venus retrograde in Aries Pisces? Well, it's the end game is to wake you up to living a more connected, i.e. holistic life, a life where you understand What you choose, the values you harbor, the values you cultivate, the values that you cultivate that express in action and choice. Does that all occur in a system of holism, honoring your connection to the whole, or not? Or both and, like most of us messy people, right? But to always intend toward living more in, if you will, the light. Now, that's how I approach astrology. So that said, what is Venus? All right, it is about love. It is about Aphrodite. It is about however we feel about ourselves. How do you feel about yourself? Just generally. 1 to 10, where's your esteem? And now, how do you love? How do you love? This is a Venus question. How do you receive love? How do you give love? And here's the end game of this thread for now: how we love, how we give and receive love, how we exist in our sense of value. That's all about also how we express through relationship everything I just said, the answers to those questions. Well, I have low esteem in relationships. I operate this way. I'm not an unconditional lover. I'm a controlling shadow lover, actually. Okay. You're still enough, by the way. And that's pretty badass truth telling. I like it. Now, it's kind of painful, isn't it, to live that way, controlling people or I'm a overgiver, Robert. That's how I love. I overgive, hoping that, somehow I'll get to enough through it. Gotcha. I feel you. Trust me. Been there. Still there, kind of. Let's talk. This is important to understand. How you love is a pattern. And how we love is oftentimes determined by the identities we have. And then those identities begin to pattern or express how we love. And those identities we have as adaptations to trauma, as adaptations to a shame-based culture, as adaptations to a politically polarized culture. If someone really is in their light, do you think that the pattern of expression of that will be racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia? Do you think that's how they're going to love? Rhetorical question, and here's the deal. This is about a holistic inventory. With Pisces being involved, you bet, around our values. And yeah, how do you love? How do you value all things that are Aries? So we're headed there next, but I want you now just to know that these are the questions. Venus, I want you to consider it as a force in our psychology, a force in us as a co-creative ally, a force that's part of the mosaic of who you are. But what is Venus? Let's go from the larger to the smaller here, from the macro to the micro, from the impersonal to the personal. What is Venus as a cultural force when it comes to things I've already mentioned? How we value things, how we love, how that's expressed. What is Venus as a social force when it comes to how we love, what we value, and how that's expressed? Let's get personal. What is Venus in you as a psychological force of how you love and how love gets expressed? How you value yourself, how you roll with your esteem. What is Venus as, now let's go to the soul, as a spiritual force in you, and how you love and how that gets expressed. Let's level up one, because this is where Pisces goes anyway. What is Venus as a mystical force in you, as how you love and how you express love and how you value yourself? Now, to get to the Venus retrograde, its themes, what's being triggered, why, how it's taking your power, and how to get your power back, I'm going to add this in to the questions I just asked you. What is Venus? Now let's change the language a little bit. As a cultural force that shapes our values, as a societal force that has shaped our values. What is Venus? What is Venus as a psychological force in you that has shaped your values? What is Venus as a spiritual force in you that has shaped your values? A mystical force that has shaped your values. I want you to consider, just for contrast here, that yes, this is an inner part of all of us. We all have a Venus. And now let's project it out as the Greeks did in Aphrodite, and Romans is Venus. Let's consider it an actual spiritual force, a goddess. And now, where do our values come from? What do you value and why? A lot of times that'll also answer the question, who's in your life and why? Now, I'm not going down that road so much because I think that's not exactly the main thread of this Venus retrograde this time, but it's always in the mix. Who's in my life and why? What shaped your values? Could you name that? And I mean, I will offer for your consideration life experience, right? I mean, our life experiences shape our values, but those are oftentimes, when we talk about this side of it, our conscious values. What's shaped your unconscious values? Because whatever that is, that's what's being evaluated during this Venus retrograde. And why? Because you're losing power because of it. That's why. You're losing esteem because of it. That's why. You're not able to stand in yourself as an individual. That's why. And you're not able to move into all the things that are the most positive sides of Aries: courage, honor, the knight archetype, where you run through you the divine masculine and its values and honor codes like a Bushido samurai. Instead, if you don't have that light of Aries in you and the values of that, we're looking at bully, we're looking at coward, we're looking at tyrant. These are shadow Aries archetypes. And where do they come from? Someone who has shadow Aries values, who sees what? Power as something that must be grasped for, taken from people, without any regard to their individuality, individual right to have the same freedom to be themselves that you do, that we do. Are you seeing the connection here? So if we're going to get into this main thread, what we have to do now is we have to start from the retrograde and go back. In fact, I actually changed how I name these events because of this, because I think it just works better. So let me get back to this graph. Hold everything I just said in you. If it's not all connecting yet, it's okay. It will. I got you. But I want you to and by the way, if I'm showing you this graph and you're like, I don't know what those signs are, you can take a screenshot of this. This is a legend that I've put together, obviously, that shows you all the astrological symbols and even the planetary ones and what they mean, and also the 4 angles of the birth chart, by the way. And I'm not going to get into that. I just want you to know, give you this as a reference point, as something to use when we start looking at things like this. So we've got Venus here. Now it's set up at 25 degrees Pisces. It went into Aries, crossed the anaretic degree into Aries. And what it did and has done is brought up a lot of shadow Aries values and dynamics, which have been, frankly, in full display politically in my country and across the world. So all that's happened with Ukraine, all that's happened with the Trump administration, all that's happened with tariffs across the world now, I just recruit it all here. And this isn't about getting political in terms of choosing a side, because that's not the level we're headed to. Okay. We're not bringing political identities too much into this discussion, frankly, because they're the problem. That's what this cycle is showing us. They're the problem. They're why we're losing power. So hang with me. I am summoning your soul to hang with me. And I mean that. All right. Now, coming back to this. All right. Things are activating. I mean, in you, and go to your personal life. Where were these things kind of coming up for you personally? This is one of those times it's really hard for me, actually. And this is personal and my journey with it. But to separate out personally what's been happening in my system with this particular cycle and the world. I'm someone that deeply cares about the world. That, as an astrologer, I've always tapped into the world's creative cycles and all that. My whole entire journey with astrology, the past 30 years. I started when I was 19. I'm 52 now. Pretty soon I'll have to say 35 years. That's kind of crazy. But I want you to understand that what I'm after here is we want to understand, hey, up until now, what's been coming up? Now let's start where the retrograde is, where we are now, and that's in Aries. And most notably, the shadow values of Aries, the shadow archetypes of Aries. So I'm going to keep this simple because it truly just can be this simple. Aries, let's just talk about it in this, and that's also to say there's more. But for now, let's just talk about it as identity. When we're born, in astrology, all the zodiac signs follow each other in an organic evolutionary sequence that maps the exact biocycle, mystical stages of our evolution as human beings. That means biological, psychological, spiritual, and mystical. So if we look at this wheel again, Aries is where we begin. We all began with Aries. Our first breath was part of the Aries pattern. And the second part would be, hey, we were given what? A name. What's a name? It's an identity. I was given the name Robert. And you were given the name perhaps that you have. Maybe you've changed your name since then. Okay. But my point being here, this is about identity. And let me then follow that through with, we have soul agreements to have identities. These are wonderful things. This is not necessarily positive or negative per se. These are the vehicles through which we maneuver and go through life as co-creators through identity. One of my other identities would be astrologer. I'm a gay man, so there's an identity. I'm a white male, obviously. I am a man. There's an identity. What are yours? I want you to start thinking, what are your identities? And okay, let me give you a few of my shadow ones. Let's because this is what this starts to become. I have struggled with a shadow overgiver and adult child archetypal identity. And that is now conscious in me, but it took a long ass time to become conscious. Those are adaptations to my abusive childhood with 2 alcoholic parents. And also I would say adaptations to growing up in a shame-based culture that shamed gays and made them feel like they didn't have a right to exist. I have identities around that. So when you look at your identities, you look all across the board, the ones that you were just born into. And then that's what I was saying. Which ones did we get from society, from culture? What about family? Family legacy? What identities from your family legacy do you maybe still actually have and you maneuver from? And yet they're unconscious. Let me give you an example of what that can look like. So I used to live in Dallas, Texas for a brief time. And I noticed something very interesting. The sociologist in me noticed something very interesting about people in Dallas. Now, this is not everyone in Dallas by any means. It was something I noticed as a significant thing in a lot of people that I happened to meet. In Texas, a lot of, Texas, and this is like in the 90s, by the way. Let's go circa 1996. Texas has a lot of rural communities, and a lot of those people from rural communities oftentimes feel that they're not as sophisticated as city people. So when they move to the city, I noticed a lot of people from those rural communities would, to compensate for feeling less than or less sophisticated than the city people, they would become pretentious. They would bring in an identity of status and looking down, and hypercompensate with then social status, and spend a lot of money on watches and designer clothes and this and that and the other, because they were trying to compensate for coming from a farm or which is beautiful and nothing wrong with that at all. But in their interior, how they felt in relationship to a quote unquote sophisticated city, certain identities came online as adaptations to defend their esteem or get to some esteem. When we all have a version of this. So when we look at our identities and our values, this is where we begin. And that's what Aries is about. It's about identity. Now, being born is an Aries phenomena. It takes sort of a violent experience, birth, to come into this world. Ask any woman who's given birth, right? And not right, wrong, good, or bad. It's just part of, if we looked at creation, it's a masculine out of the womb. We're given a name, we take our first breath, and we're off to the races of developing further identities for multiple reasons, as I've just mentioned, and evolving. Now, at some point, if you're scheduled, you start to evolve kind of in this reverse way. You go into human psychology, you evolve these identities. So some of them are survival adaptations to things like abuse, trauma. I come from literally the trailer parks of Granby, Colorado. That's where I grew up. I come from a poor family. I mean, I could go into the white trash identity, all things that are part of my history and part of identities that I still see some of my family members struggling with. And then the thing I want to make for you to understand here and use as your metric is, am I still struggling with that, and how and where does it shape my values? Now, this is a great example. Because I come from really nothing, I have a very different value around money, and I have a very different value around status. I don't care about designer this, designer, I never have. And that's not to judge anyone who does. Some designer stuff's really nice. But that's just to say my intentionality and my values in that sector of me, which is very Venus, are not dominated by the need to wear Prada or anything like that. I own nothing like that because it's just not my value. That's all. What are yours? Why do you have them? What do they direct you to choose? Now, this is where there's a lot going on right now that's trying to wake us all up to, who am I and what do I value? And why do I value that? And is it time for a shift? Because this is a retrograde, yes, it's time for a shift in some way or other. And I'm going to guide you to what that shift is. Why? Once again, you're losing power. If you're waking up and you cannot handle the news and you cannot handle the onslaught of aggressive shadow Aries energy that's triggered up right now, first of all, big hug. But secondly, okay, we got to get you more resilient in some way. Because the option of, I'm just going to shadow Pisces out of this, whether through addiction or fantasy or ignoring it, or just going off into one's own law of attraction fantasy world, it won't work. It really, really won't work now. Never did, but it's really going to be obvious very quick. So then the lesson is what? How do we get stronger in some new value? What is that value? And how can it become, if you will, since we're still in Aries here, a warrior on our behalf, a knight in shining Piscean armor? And that's where we are. So that's why I'm telling you, the main thread is you're losing power. We are, me too, hey. So how have you been losing your power? And what, now go to identity. What identity is the part of you that takes over and starts to doom scroll? What identity is the part of you that gets infuriated and then starts just swearing and posting and calling this side and that side whatever names? It all gets to be here. Okay. It really does. I mean, I've had my share of this of late. I'm more, I think, skilled at, I don't call names for one. I mean, there's things I just don't do because it's not part of my values, but I get it. It's hard to keep your self-centered. And what I'm offering you here is the alchemy through working with identities that will allow you to stay centered and aware of when a certain identity is in the driver's seat and it's not helpful, it's not useful, it does not bring light to this world, and it darkens you. And it causes you to lose your power. And at the end of the day, because you are what? A spiritually maturing adult, we don't want to do that, right? We want to stay in a core sense of self, cultivate this ongoingly for the rest of our lives, in which we stay on our throne as sovereigns, benevolent, beautiful, light sovereigns. No matter which dark tyrant entices us off the throne. Now, the catch here is that doesn't mean we don't fight the good fight. No, we do fight the good fight. It's how we fight the good fight. And I want you to take this pivot right now as a Venus retrograde in Aries pivot. And that's, hey, what if I told you this Piscean mystical truth about you? And that is, you're already free. You're already free. But that freedom is really an internal state. So that's not to say there aren't maybe forces coming for your rights, your freedoms, your resources. I'm not negating that. I'm not saying that that isn't true as well. What I'm saying is internally, we're coming into mystical truth. You're already free. By the way, let's go to Venus and esteem. You're already enough. It's called soul esteem. If I were to mystically, in our near-death experience as your angel, share with you this truth as you do this life review with me, we'd be looking at, oh my gosh, the whole time I was always enough. I just didn't know it. I just didn't feel it. Culture had stuffed it down. My abuse had stuffed it down. The trauma I went through had stuffed it down. My shadow victim identity that I thought was my power had stuffed it down. I thought I would only get to enough when so-and-so paid for what they did to me, or so-and-so blah, blah, blah. And I filled in blanks, and that was what I fought for. And I lost power all the damn time, every step of the way, every step of the fight. Instead of fighting the good fight, with the knowledge I was already enough. The fight was never about worthiness. The fight was never really about freedom from the point of view of my own capacity to feel free in me. By the time the United States Supreme Court legalized gay marriage for my community, I actually didn't care, in the sense that internally I already had the right to do that. So whether society or culture ever officially, legally gave me that right, it wasn't for me like, oh, now I'm finally free. I was always free. Did that mean I didn't fight the good fight and join my fellow brothers and sisters for marriage equality? Absolutely not. I totally joined that fight, but I didn't go into that fight thinking, well, I can't officially be married to so-and-so. Not that I've ever been married, because, the laws don't let me yet. That's not how I approached it. And what I want you to consider right now in you and what's happening is, where are you looking around and where are you going until so-and-so, until Elon Musk is finally out of our data, out of blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to sit here scattered, triggered all over the place and until the Democrats finally realize they're demonic, until, whatever narrative and identity in you generates that narrative. I'm just telling you technically, it's causing you to lose power. It's causing you to lose the power and energy you need for the fight. But if you can approach from this new inner shift, this is Aries, yeah, you got to fight the good fight. There'd be no civil rights without fighting the good fight. But how do we fight? Do we fight as if our freedom is in the hands of someone else? Or do we fight to express through the fight the freedom we already feel, the freedom we already have? Because if you do that, you don't lose power. If every day you wake up and you say, you know what? I internally live in a democracy. And I internally, with my soul, know who is the dictator and who is the transgressed. So my fight isn't to prove that. With my soul, I know that. And when I say soul, I mean your heart. I know that. So now I'm going to enter the fight knowing that, because my soul contract asks of me to bring what is internally already awake into external expression. And whether it perfectly can, or even perhaps can at all express, does not determine my power. I do not move within identities that believe that either. Now, what I just laid down right there kind of feels like a mic drop moment that you got to kind of sit with and just let it shift in. To me, it's more like a transmission, like, oh, if I lost weight because I'm carrying an extra 100 pounds, and I did that to get to enough versus I'm enough, I'm going to lose this weight to express that enoughness through a healthier me. You see the difference of power? Every time you got on that scale, on that weight loss journey, you would not lose power if it was, the weight loss is about expressing the love I already have for me and letting it reaffirm more and more, I'm a badass. I'm enough. Pound by pound. Oop, went up a few pounds. It was Thanksgiving. Okay, it doesn't matter. Back on track. No shame cycle here. This isn't a yo-yo moment. This is just, it was Thanksgiving. I had an emotional eating relapse. This is just, and now I'm back. Do you see how much faster your power flows? Now, I'm going to level this up, way up, shortly. But I want you to get this base level of what I'm after here and why I'm telling you this Venus retrograde is about how you're losing power. Now, let's connect the dots that I've presented here. Through what? Identities. And thread it again through the values of your identities. I want you to sit down, Venus does too, and write down some identities you've got active now and begin to use this information I've given you, these insights, to evaluate, hey, okay, is this costing me power to move and create my life through the values of this identity? Is this costing me power? Now we're in Aries right now. So let's come into your fighter, your warrior, your knight, your adventurer, your risk taker. Let's come into your king, queen. Let's come into just, those are archetypes, but let's just come into how you identify yourself. And here we go. Let's come into your political identities. What are they? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you an independent? Are you, I don't vote. I don't have one. It all gets to be here. But we're going to evaluate how these perhaps cost us power, cost us grace and cost us light. Because I think if there's anything we can all agree on right now, it's that they do cost us light. And if that's something you can't agree with me on, then maybe this teaching isn't right for you right now, and that's okay. But it is, and has always been actually, for me as a gay man, on full display, that political identities tend to cost people light, their grace, their heart, the, if you will, beautiful teachings of Christ and values of Christ are obliterated oftentimes by political identities. As a gay man, I saw this as friends of mine were abandoned by their Christian families again and again and again. So we're at a flexion point with all of this, are we not? Something's trying to end here within everything I just said that has such societal and cultural and familial karmic momentum in it. Everything I just said is located in all of those parts of what makes us us. There comes, however, for some of us a time where we're under contract to evolve past this. And if you've been someone that's done a lot of inner spiritual work on yourself, and let's just first start with therapeutic psychological work on yourself, then I would say you're someone who's on a schedule or a timeline where at some point, the mystical side of you, might call that your higher self, deeper self, true self, essential self, all of it's good for me. There comes a time when that's more important than what your political tribe says, your family says, your society says, your church says. I met that early as a gay man because I had to somehow come into, wait a minute, I didn't choose to be gay. Did you choose to be straight? When was that actually? When did that happen for you? The only choice I ever made was to be honest about my own true nature and my innate attraction toward the same sex. I made a choice to be honest about that. But that was not something I chose. And if anyone ever said that, yeah, well, being gay is a choice. No, it ain't. When did you choose to be straight? And when you start to push it back this way, we begin to be confronted with identities and assumptions. And this is where we are, these threads. So we're going to, and that's Aries, okay? That's the Aries part as far as I'm concerned, in as much as I'm going to engage it here. But what happens here with, as I said, this retrograde, is that the retrograde goes from Aries back into Pisces. So the first part of this is actually about, and this is where we are now, being confronted with the karmic consequences through synchronistic events and synchronicity of the shadow masculine side of Aries, the shadow archetypes involved that many carry in their patterns. So how do you identify these patterns in yourself and other people? Well, you just start to look at your behavior. I mean, do you need a lot of instruction on recognizing someone as a bully? It's pretty obvious usually. Shadow Aries archetype, or as a dictator or as an authoritarian. Do you need examples of that? I mean, their pattern will always tell the truth no matter what they say. This is a thread from the last time I was live, where I talked about the Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius being about telling the truth about people's patterns, including our own. So when you feel you're confronted with having to use Mars energy, here comes the Mars retrograde integration phase. Mars rules Aries. When you come into some kind of synchronistic moment in your life where you're confronted with how you relate to Mars energy, what patterns, what identities and archetypes are there for you? Do you have a strong coward? And this is not to make you wrong. This is to tell the truth, because this is where you can make the change and make the shift and really get into the light of the Pisces and what I'm going to address there. But what do you do? And that's a question you got to sit with and go, what do I do? What do I go coward? Do I not vote? Do I protest vote? What do I do when it's messy life and there's a lot of stuff here and there's wars that I don't agree with and there's things going on I don't agree with in both political parties or this and that in the world, and what do you do? And that's for you to answer. It's not for me to. Where are we? We're in the near-death experience. In this energy, there's no judgment. There's just pure karmic truth. This is what you decided. This is why you decided it. This is how it impacted people. This is how it affected you. And by the way, we do a lot of wonderful light maneuvers and light moves and light choices, in as much as we sabotage and we hurt and whatever else we do. Let's be clear. But retrogrades focus on the shadow. Hence why I'm focused on the shadow. And sometimes we got to acknowledge, hey, I'm kind of a badass when it comes to these things. And my Aries shows up. I show up with honor. I do not call names. I am, however, at the same time, not caving to someone else's power move. I have identities that I've cultivated that scaffold my throne and my centeredness and my connection to myself, and most importantly, my connection to the light. Now we're heading into Pisces. So as we head to Pisces, which Venus is not back in Pisces yet, I will get in more into those dates and stuff inside of my my event this weekend and polish up some of this stuff even more. But when Venus gets back into Pisces, it's going to ask questions about our relationship and values within the light. And I'm going to have to transfer language a little bit here and bring more language in, really, to humanize what the light is and what God is and what the soul is, because these are sometimes very amorphous things that we try to understand with the mind. Well, the mind can't understand that. So there's that, but you can understand it with this. And within Pisces, I've brought forward this new understanding in my teachings around it as a water sign, not just being a water sign. I feel Pisces to be water, yes. One of the fish is water, and the other fish is grace. One of the fish is your human heart, the part of you that feels personally the world. And the other part of the other fish is the cosmic heart, the part of you connected to the heart of all of creation, the heart of God, if you will. That's the pattern of Pisces to me. And what I've seen in people and my students. And we are in an evolution now to understand how to live as humans that are connected to a cosmic heart. But what would get in the way of that? Well, identities. The fundamentalist Christians that I encountered in my very first gay pride parades in the early 90s, they carried signs, hateful signs around our parades. And I always felt really compassionately sad for them. I never felt anger, genuinely, because I just always had this spiritual longing to feel and be with God. And I know that they do too in some way. But the identity of the shadow Christian in them that's really Antichrist was so strong they couldn't feel anything but hate. And it's Adam and Steve, not Adam and Eve, and all the things I used to see. The sort of things that karmically lead to a Matthew Shepard hanging on a fence in Wyoming. So in this Venus retrograde, we are now in a space when it gets to the Pisces part, where we enter this near-death experience moment of all that we're in as the cosmic heart in the near-death experience. That's all we are in. And we're looking at the moves of the human heart and its reactivity and its emotional conditioning and its identities and all its maneuvers to protect vulnerability that were toxic and harmful and hateful at times and mean. And so let me offer some context in terms of the timeline of events we're headed toward. Because what you'll see next, and have already seen in the setup phase, is that there will be events ahead that are going to bring everybody to exactly what I'm talking about right now. Are you going to let this event finally break your heart enough to open your heart to the cosmic heart? My friend and colleague Andrew Harvey once said in an interview on one of my radio shows back in the day that the only heart worth having is a broken one. And there were some ways I disagreed with that because that sounds like ugh. But where it's really true, and Rumi hints at this, and he's a profound teacher of Rumi, is that it's the broken heart, it's the human heart and its heartbreak that allows the connection to the cosmic to happen. At least that's been the pattern so far for most human beings. And that was the journey and teachings of Christ. Can you open past your human heart and open to the cosmic? And from there, what are your values now? So in the evolution of life, and life has running through it the light of holism everywhere. And the driving force moving in the end, all of life is that. What gets challenged is where all of us at this time are unable to open to something greater than our human heart. And let me say it in terms of Venus, greater than the values of our human heart. What keeps you stuck in values that, if you're honest, and if we're in the near-death experience state, we can see do not let the light in, do not move with the light, do not move with grace. They move with judgment. They move with othering others. They move with demonization and toxic tribalism. Here's why I'm bringing this up, and I've already talked about, and I have some more insight into some events, which I actually am not going to mention because I might mention it in my weekend stuff, but I'm not mentioning it publicly because it's actually almost too dark. It's too dark. There are dark things ahead here that are going to bring us in this cycle to these questions more than we've already been. I'm going to say it another way because I really want everyone to hear this. As dark as it is now, it is going to get darker. You don't really have to be an intuitive to feel that. I think you already feel that. And that's part of why you're losing power and your system's freaking out. So part of what the Venus cycle offers is how to be with what is even going to be darker. I got you. We're not quite there yet. We're on our way. But this is where I want you now is, hey, the retrograde bringing up, all right, this question, what are your soul's values? Moreover, how would you even know, right? What are my soul's values? What are they? That's a massive question. Robert, how would I even know? Now, I want to weave something in here with some structure from the actual retrograde itself. And that is, there will be a midpoint here within this retrograde cycle. There's always midpoints within retrograde cycles, and that's when, depending on the planet, in this case, Venus aligns with the sun. Now, you don't see it here, but I'm going to put up this graph so you can. this shows you the full retrograde structure and stats. Now, you can look to see where this is happening in your birth chart. And actually this weekend in my special event coming up, I will guide you to do that. But what's important for now, and I want you to understand, is that the actual midpoint occurs on March 22nd, and it occurs at 2 degrees Aries, the very beginning of Aries, really. And it's a conjunction with the sun joining Venus in the sky at 2 degrees Aries. And as this happens, Venus goes from being the evening star to the morning star. And in Mesoamerican astrology, which was brilliant at tracking Venus, probably more than even anyone in Babylonia and the Greeks, etc., they believe that there was this transfiguration that occurred at that time within the actual gender of Venus. And so what we're looking at here, let me bring it into modern day understanding and what it means, is that by the time we get to March 22nd, this toxic shadow Aries activation is, and by the way, by this time we're in a Mercury actual retrograde. Keep in mind, since March 1st, since just days ago, we've been setting up for a Mercury retrograde. That means anything that's happening now is part of a setup of yet another deep dive into these same archetypal dynamics, but from a different point of view. Like I said, I'm going to cover that in my special event. And you're going to get PDF guides for this, by the way, for both this one and also Mercury and eclipse charts. Now, what are your soul's values and how do you know? Well, here's what I would like to offer as some advice. It's quite likely that most of your ego identities can't answer that question. So if you think the Democrat in you can answer that question, I'm going to say, think again. If you think the Republican in you can answer that question, I'm going to say, think again. If you think the American in you or Canadian in you or German in you or Japanese in you, wherever you have identity, which is not right or wrong, okay? We all need identity. It's part of the game. It's part of co-creation. It's part of our journey. But ego identities, most certainly wounded ego shadow identities that we may not even be aware of, they're not going to answer this question, what are your soul's values? At least not fully. So what does then? What does actually answer that? Now, I can say the soul, duh, right? But that's too obvious, and it doesn't give you traction in, I think, a gritty way to roll with that question in the lives we're living right now. So let me get into, as we often have to do with all things soul, into some storytelling and also into some riffing around to get you to understand, even technically though, what it takes to answer that question, what are my soul's values? Let me point you toward a North Star with this first. And that's to say, and let's bring political identities in because I think it's just so teachable. Your soul's values, our soul's values, which by the time we get to soul, we're in the all, we're in all of us, we're in all as one. So at the end, our soul's values actually are all the same. I'm going to risk saying that. Our soul's gifts are not, but our soul's values are. And that's the key to answering that question. This is the Venus retrograde in Pisces part coming alive. And it's going to say, what are your values? What are the values that you right now have that are higher and bigger than your, let's just say, political identities? Now, if you are rigidly in a political identity, I just felt you get stumped, because what's going on now generally in the culture in the United States and world is people are doubling down into political identities or questioning them, which is wonderful, and going, wait a minute, is this in harmony with my soul? if they are at all. And what I'm saying is that what's ahead here, what's trying to happen here is a wake-up call to just that question right there. And now track with me. What would it take to shake someone out of a very, at this point in time, rigid Democrat or Republican identity? What would that take? Let's go Republican. What next darkness would have to happen, or loss of resources, or fill in the blank, climate disaster that does not get aid? What would it take? And here's what I want you to know. This is how I know this stuff, is because what I'm talking about is the essence of a dark night process. And this is something I've studied for the whole time I've worked with astrology, and then clients, and did 10,000 readings on it. We are in a collective dark night. What does that mean? We are in a dark night of identities. The identities we have collectively are killing us and leading us to kill each other and not care about each other and not cultivate and embody the values of the soul. Feel that for a minute. So what happens instead is, someone could bring up something. This happens online all the time. Maybe you've done this. Maybe, I know I have to some degree. I've gotten more masterful, which I'm very happy about, but there's always an invitation to do the battle of identities every day. I'm going to tell you right now, stop. That's not the battle to fight. That's not, to me, the battle that will empower you. In fact, the opposite. It's the battle that will take power from you. Have you lost, I don't know how many hours to debating people through political identities about this and that and blah, blah, blah? Where did it get you? How did it leave you feeling? Right? So then how do we engage this? Well, let's come back to our near-death experience. We have to, for ourselves first, and this is where we are, ask, what are the values I have that are larger than my political identity? You've got another identity hanging you up, go there. And how does my allegiance to my identities, whatever they are, and let's just stay in the shadow ones, actually shut down my light, shut down my access to the greater power of grace and light? You want to know why you're feeling disempowered? It's because whatever identities you're moving in right now and the values that they have are shutting down your access to greater light and grace. Calling someone a name online, does that bring power to your system or take power away? Does that bring honor to your system or dishonor you? Does that bring grace to your system or disgrace you? And I don't care what political identity you're coming from. I really don't. And nor does your angel. We're in a near-death experience. And guess what? In this state, you're not a Democrat. You're not a Republican. You're not even an independent. You're a soul. Guess what? You're not Muslim. You're not Jewish here either. You're not Christian. If you've arrived at a certain level of mystical awakening, this is where we are. These earthbound packages and cultural packages that are products of hundreds of years of movements of cycles on the planet, from age of Gemini to age of Pisces. They don't come with to the other side. Wouldn't you agree? Everyone that's had a near-death experience, I've never seen anyone say, I was a Democrat then. I kept that. I kept my Republican identity. Now, some people are met by Buddha. Some people are met by Jesus. They're met by whatever spiritual force is most familiar to their personality. But my sense is if they hung out in heaven long enough, that would fade away to just a light being of love. Whether they meet Jesus, okay. But whatever they met light. I never heard someone in near-death experience say, now go back down and, you know what, own those libs. And hey, hit a little more on those gun-toting Republicans. I never, ever, ever have heard that. Have you? So that puts things in perspective, yeah? And gives us a sense of, okay, will our politics from this planet important to heaven? I'm going to say no. Do you think your political identities do too? I'm going to say no. So my intuitive work the past 2 decades, every reading, I never saw this. In fact, I saw the opposite. I always guided people out of identities into something from the soul. That was the core of my work and still is. I just do it as a teacher now. And I guess astrologer, because here we are. Yet we act like our values from our ego identities are our power. Are they? Are they? Now, they can't have power. I'm not saying there's no power there. But let's go to this question. Do these ego identities and their values have access to greater power? What does that greater power look like? Does that greater power look like, yeah, I do have access to greater power, but it requires that I take power away from this group of people or that group of people or this race or that sexuality or that gender identity? Is that what that looks like? Because that's vampiric and that's actually dark. Let's go Star Wars. That's Darth Vader territory. So did I not just name what's active in the world? And where there seems to be confusion about who's a dictator and who isn't, and who invaded a country and who didn't. When in fact, the events are obviously able to present karmically self-evident truths on these things. Yet to defend identities, we're watching how folks collapse to shadow Aries archetypes and shadow Pisces as well. Where are you at in this? Now, as an example, again, I just witnessed that we have a white Christian nationalist movement on the rise, as evidenced today by something Elon Musk happened to tweet about the man who killed George Floyd being pardoned, advocating for that. Sit with that for a minute. How does that feel to you? Does that feel right? Does that feel like the soul's in there? Does that feel like there's a soul energy? How does that feel? And the question is feel. Now, my point being, we have white Christian nationalists that want to take over the United States with their religious movement, yet the irony is that in their own title of being a white Christian nationalist, there's literally no Christ, no Christian teachings of Christ, no values of Christ in their movement. And by the way, Jesus Christ was not white. He came from what is now known as Palestine. So what do you think this Venus retrograde is going to bring up? Because it's part of the holism of light of life for us as a lesson regarding these sorts of things. So speaking of Christ, listen, I compassionately understand and know for myself how it's hard when we get into the grit of being human and all the complexities that come with being human regarding identities and values and choices. I really get it. I mean, I truly do. I mean, last year for myself, share a little personal vulnerability here. There was a lot of activation around Gaza and Israel. I'm gonna have to drink some water here. And I had to kind of take a minute because I had a student kind of coming after me, frankly, but it's okay because I kind of hold it with love. I didn't appreciate it very much, but because they felt I wasn't speaking up enough about Gaza, which actually I had, ironically, said something. But I did not know the history of Israel and Gaza enough to say something. And I hadn't taken a minute to feel what? The values of my soul to say something. That's just what's true. I'm not the teacher that won't stand up and say something. And most of you know that about me right now. Here we are right now. But I was not ready because I was not going to hop into an identity like that and start speaking from that identity without first checking in with my soul, my light. And as I negotiated for months this question of which side, where I ended up after doing a deep dive into the history between Israel and Palestinians, I came out with a both and sense about it. And yet what was going on online, especially with spiritual teachers, was such shaming and such damning and this and that. When you're going to speak up, instead of asking, hey, what are your thoughts on it? Would you mind sharing those? And at the time I was going through horrific family things, and I was barely holding on personally in my own life. And no student would have known that, but no student would have asked either. And so I get, however, it's messy sometimes trying to figure out, what do I feel about this? Where are my values with this? And if you are someone that says, I need a minute, I need to feel through that, I respect that so much. That's what this Venus retrograde is showing us. We need to take a minute. We got to feel through things. And some things we feel, but we don't know how then to move within the situation in ways where we can bring light. And so instead, we're going to thrash around and then not even realize maybe we're actually harming the thing we're trying to protect or the thing we're trying to advocate for. So I get it though. This Venus retrograde, it feels very similar to me of where I was with that situation. And so it is about us reevaluating which identities and their values are actively running our lives. And we're going to be shown that, and we are being shown that now. The set of phases already brought it up, and now we're going into the shadow side full on. And this is where the question about power comes in. So let's thread this again and go deeper. If you believe and if you think that your ego identities, and most notably your shadow wounded ego identities, alone and their values hold the power to navigate your life and the challenges that we're in now, you're just simply going to lose power. It is technical. Because that is like you trying to run a whole city power grid, on one battery. And that battery may actually be a vampiric battery that's got to take power from something or someone else to run it all. Your whole grid may be that way based on whatever identity you have rolling. So what is at issue here, and you're going to feel it, you're in it, I know you are, is do you understand within your identities, Aries, where you have power and where you don't, Pisces? Do you understand where you have access to greater power and where you don't, Pisces? Think of life as a power grid, dimensionally expanded into, yes, right here where we're having a near-death experience life review. That's life too, just vibrationally in a different zone. I want you to come into the understanding of where power is, where the power of the light is. Do you know that? Have you felt that before in your life? I bet you have. Now, are you waking up every day feeling connected to that? I bet you're not. Maybe the connection's in and out. It's like bad Wi-Fi or a bad cell signal. I'm telling you what's causing that is your identities. You can make it about what Trump does or the Dems do or this and that, whatever it is. And I'm going to tell you, no. You are not out of identities that cause interference and distortion with greater power coming through. That's what's up. And now the question is, which identities? How's this working? How do I course correct? All right, let's go with that question. Let me ask you, are you willing to give up a political identity if it meant that you could be connected to the cosmic heart, kindness, compassion, grace, knowing the real battle and real rebellion to engage? Are you willing to do that? Could you give that up and become let's just go with independent like me? Or you got to root down. And why do you got to root down? You can't admit that your side was wrong? That you maybe voted in a way outside of your core soul's values? Hey, admit it, it's okay. You're enough no matter what. Nothing I say or anything you do will ever diminish that. But don't you want to affirm life? Affirm power for your life? Affirm the light in life? And here's the thing. You might ask, well, Robert, how do I know if I am doing that? Oh my God, it's so basic. Of course you know. You know when you're disempowering someone and calling them a name online. You know when you're saying something to go gut somebody and make them wrong. You know when you're not open to actually connect with somebody and hear what's going on with them. You know when you've got to be the one who's right in a conversation. You know when you lose power. You know, we all do. We know, we feel it, and we know what comes online when that happens, what tries to get our power back. And that usually is trying to make the other person wrong. That usually is trying to one-up them with this and that, and this information, and this and that name calling. And all that does is darken you. It darkens you. And of course, the world. So in this near-death state, we're reviewing now how you go dark, how you bring darkness, how you get into dark grids of identities, of identity. So at the core here is a confusion around power and powerlessness. Here's the truth about being human. We're powerless in a lot of ways, and we always will be. I'm not changing how this solar system rolls and how the earth, rotates in such a way that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and nor are you. I'm powerless to that. And I could extrapolate from that a lot of other things. You're powerless to the limited perceptions and evolution people have to see what you see. But you're not powerless to hold prayer, grace, light, and kindness for them. You're never powerless to do that. And if you feel you are, there's a soul prayer called, hey, universe, I don't think I can hold light for this. Bring it. Because I don't got it. I'm with you on that. But entering your day in a triggered state and then getting into all these triggers. And let me just say something about triggering. There is something I identified called mystical triggering. It's when you see that the holism of someone else is being violated. When you see a veteran that has fought and sacrificed for this country lose their job, lose their benefits out of nowhere in ways that are unconstitutional, and that pisses you off. And I'm going to call that a mystical trigger. Might be more, but let's just go with mystical trigger. Why? Because your soul goes, no, you're violating their holism and the honor of the country that they fought for and the honor they gave based on a sacred agreement with that country to be its knight, to be its warrior. And you and me can both go, whoa, that's not within my soul's values. We're tracking in the light. You and me right now, yeah. And then I'm going to look at you and go, okay, how are we going to enter into this fight? Let's not name call. That doesn't bring the light. Let's, yes, protest, hold people to account. Absolutely. Do what we can within the systems that exist. Absolutely. At some point, will we be called maybe to rebellion and revolution? Absolutely. But we show up what? Knowing one, we're already free. Two, we're just expressing the holism in us. And you know what that does? You know what it does for you and me? That lets us, through prayer, through grace, access greater power. We become channels then of light. But it takes a divine masculine honor code, this is Shadow Aries, and divine masculine values to pull that off. And that's what this Venus retrograde's after. Do you carry the honor codes that the knights of old had, that the Bushido samurai had, that Joseph Campbell in his work with Myth on Knights so masterfully delineated for us all to understand? I have a black belt in Taekwondo. I was in the 80s Karate Kid era studying Taekwondo. We had a very traditional school, and we had to learn Korean, and we had to know the 5 tenets of Taekwondo. It was a very honorable, old school martial arts education and training within the divine masculine martial arts, Mars arts. That does not exist really now. Can you be that? Can you apprentice that? Because the light cannot often flow through the warriors in us without it. We have to have honor. That doesn't, and that means because someone called you a name, now you have permission to call them a name. Is that what you would define as your honor code? And what values give birth to that? We're in a culture that runs on victim consciousness and victim honor codes, shadow victim honor codes. You hurt me, so I get to hurt you. You try to investigate me for shady shit I did, so now I get to come after you. And I get to gaslight, scapegoat. This is on full display. And if you're not seeing it, that's okay. I'm going to have you sit down in this near-death experience with me and a story that I'm going to share with you that hopefully helps. So if you're looking to understand the true cause of your power loss, I'm going to offer for you to explore that you are running on identities that are not sourced from your soul to the extent that the values of the soul are in those identities. And this is for everyone, myself included. And when I really started to get the downloads on this for my own life, I started to feel my power. I found myself doing prayer grids, lighting and moving with soul prayer every night. And let me tell you something, your light practices have got to amp up. Your soul prayer practice has to amp up. I literally just the other night, probably like you, was feeling like, oh my fucking God, from the last headline or the last events of the day. And I, what identity is this? Okay, I'm gonna give you a hug, my little dragon. And then and maybe I'll put a photo up online of this, created a light prayer grid, and it's beautiful. And I lit it and I went around to every candle, there's probably 20, and I prayed a particular prayer for light to flow. And it changed the whole energy of my home, me, and I could feel. And you can see with me in this near-death experience when prayers are said, how light beams from the light grid down to situations. I could feel that light doing that. I could feel it. So maybe there's something in there for you. Now, if you've been losing your power, how do you get it back? Well, did you have it in the first place? That's a great question to ask. What identities can harbor and hold the power of the soul, the values of the soul, the light of the soul? I would let's use what the values possibly could be of the soul. Kindness, care. We are all one. We all have value. We all matter. We are all from the light. God does not make mistakes, so no one's a mistake. And that's a hard one, because you can look at certain people and go, you've got to be a mistake. You've just got to be. In the same way, other people would go, well, transgender people are a mistake. We have to hold a light honor code. So I'm going to say, hey, what in you, what identity in you can do that? That will not meet people at the same level at the dark they bring. And yet, this is not saying anything. This is not fighting the good fight. It's not that. Aries is here. Pisces is here. In this retrograde, we have to have a new value set that lets us also take that value, just like they did in World War II, just like they did in the Civil War, and go fight. You've got to fight in some way and have a value to fight. Is there value in fighting? Absolutely. I would have never had the opportunity to get married as a gay man without that, or have any kind of protections, civil, basic protections against hate crimes without fighting with my community. You can't sit out things now. That's another, your values need to include. I don't sit things out. I work with my soul to figure out where I slot in. Okay, so I'm going to share with you kind of a little bit about my past 5 years and then go into a story. As usual, I'm at 2 hours. Oops. I want to remind everyone, I'm going to go deeper into the Venus retrograde this Sunday with this event. And this is the info on it. It's a live stream event, 4 hours long. It will be post-produced for on-demand viewing. Obviously, you can watch this on demand on whatever social media platform you're seeing it. I would more recommend YouTube. They seem to be better about getting things out these days. I am also going to ask you right now to like this video. I put a lot of work, soul, and blood, sweat, and tears into creating it. So if you wouldn't mind, as a reciprocity back to me, take a minute, smash that like button, share it with other people that you think it will help. This is what we'll be covering. It's going to be this Venus retrograde part 2. So everything I just said, I'm going to take to every sun sign and talk about what everything I just said is going to mean for each sun sign. That's going to be super exciting. I usually don't do that, but I can't wait to do that. We're going to go into the upcoming eclipse. It's on the 13th, coming up this next week. We're going to look at the Mercury retrograde. I'm going to give a guide on that with a PDF guide to go with it, and a new moon solar eclipse in Aries. We're going to look at that, which actually happens at the end of the month on the 29th. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more about, which I talked too much about, the Mars retrograde integration phase that we are in. And I'm going to share with you some intuitive downloads I had on what's next. I happen to have a knack for being pretty accurate at predicting when I'm able to, because sometimes I can't lock it in, events. And if you want to really get into the things I've already laid down, that's where I'm going to point you to this Hello Compass Astrology 2025. It's a massive guide with a 50+ ebook that comes with it, with a lot of diagrams like I'm showing you here. It's on sale right now for 40% off until the 13th. And, I'm just going to tell you guys, I've done some incredible, and I don't say this from ego, it's just that sometimes I'm watching what's coming out of my mouth like you are like, oh my God. Some incredible work around Aries, the Pluto cycle, this Neptune and Saturn cycle, which I am speaking through a little bit here, but not directly. And if you want to really get into that, the bigger stuff, and Jupiter as well, that's important to maybe check out. Jupiter is also direct right now in Gemini. So there is now this, as it moves through its integration phase from its retrograde, us having to learn some lessons on how to think outside of black and white, which is a Gemini lesson, and how to, in Jupiter's case, get to our intuition by leaving behind any archetypes and perceptual ways of seeing life as either or, and move more into the rainbow of color of both and versus black and white. So that's all in there. Now, getting ready for, let me say hi to everybody. Oh my Lord. I got so serious. I'm like, I'm not even going to be able to talk to them. But how are all of you? Let's take a minute. How you doing? If you have a question, ask it. I don't know if I'm going to take it, but I'm just curious to see what's hitting you, if this is making sense, if you're tracking with me. Because if you're not, I can kind of offer some more things. I think the stories ahead will help really ground this, but I'm happy also to offer. So feel free in the comments, I do see them, to write any questions or comments you might have. Linda, it feels so sad. I know. We got this. We're light workers. We're light workers. We got this. Doesn't mean it's easy. Susan DeVita, hi. Hello. Kathy, hello. You're very welcome for this. Thank you. Karina. All right. Yeah, I know. I know you all. I could feel. I got a lot of emails like, Robert, when are you going to talk about what's going on? And actually, I already had in the astrology thing. It was so massive, it fried my system. I had to just take 2 months and just kind of blank out. But here we are. You know, of course, I'm here. Double cap. Cool name. I like it. Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. Okay, so to also give you some background on, you know, I've kind of been social in terms of social media a little bit here and there, and not active in a very consistent way, and this is why. And I want to bring this forward as a way to tie into just me really getting with all of you what it's like to be in this challenge we're in the world, in our nations, in our societies, in our politics, in our personal lives, and this Venus retrograde really having so much medicine for us. The past 5 years for me have been really tumultuous, and it started really with COVID, like for most of us, right? But I also relocated up into the mountains and bought a house. And ever since then, I've experienced some of the hardest events of my adult life. I lost 2 beloved pets. I had 2 major accidents that required surgery. I experienced the collapse and loss of my mother, as she and I went through the horrific death of my stepfather from brain cancer. And all of this was occurring while I found out that the builder and seller of my home had lied to me, and I had to sue them. And I ended up in a very costly 3.5-year lawsuit, which finally finished. And then on top of all of that, I had various friends and business partners that just shook me off like I was no longer of any value to them. And mainly because the overgiver in me couldn't give them what they wanted. And I just did some shady things without even telling me. And it showed me no compassion, you know, showed me no honor toward our whether it was our business agreements or our friendships, and used a lot of my own life circumstances to literally justify and gaslight me, justify what they were doing in breaking their contracts and gaslight me. And I mean, it's just, I get the heartbreak of this moment. And I was saying to myself, well, God, I finally get through some of this, right? And now the world's falling apart. I mean, can I get me and my collapsed victim was like, can I get a break? This isn't fair. There you go, victim. And yet I'm still standing, and I'm lighting back up, and you're going to light back up. We really do have this. I want you to take in this story I'm going to share with you from the day I voted. So, as you probably know, we had an election here in the United States in November. I think it'd be interesting just to note for now that it was a Mars retrograde election. I think that's an interesting thing to note. I would also note that the president's speech that was given last night was given during a Mercury retrograde setup phase. So I think there's more to be shaken out regarding everything said while Mercury goes retrograde. That's when things get revealed usually. So just technically, I think if you start to look at the setup phases and the retrogrades and things going on and when things are happening and the synchronicity of that, it does kind of give a more technical sense of the story archetypally and the co-creative dynamics in play, which I always find very helpful in how we can enter into them. And this is right now the lesson I wanted to share with you, obviously here. But when I had voted, I was going to upload a picture of me. I had a sticker. I voted on my blue jacket, and I had my dog, my brown lab, Charlie, with me when I went to go vote. Because I thought, we'll go to this really big 100-acre dog park after I vote. I thought, what a nice way to go decompress and feel the power of voting and all of that. So when I got down to the dog park, I was walking around a trail. It's pretty large. And I ran into this man. And he too had an I voted sticker on. And he had a German Shepherd, and he started playing with my brown lab, who's like 92 pounds. So he's the size of a bulldog, and German Shepherds usually are as well. So they were playing around, and they got on really well, jumping in this creek and all this stuff. And so I struck up a conversation with this guy, and I didn't ask him who he voted for. It just kind of felt, I don't know, I don't know, invasive maybe. But I said, "Oh, we voted, yay, yes." And he said, "Yeah." He goes, I have never not voted in an election ever since my tours in Iraq. And so my ears perked up, and I said, "Oh, really?" And I could kind of sense like he wants to tell a story, and there's a synchronistic crossing of paths here for a reason. And so I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "I died in Iraq." He goes, "We hit an IUD, and I immediately, because of the damage as it tore through my legs, ended up out of my body." And he goes, "And I could see down at the tank we were in and what had happened. And it took me a minute to kind of go, wait, why am I up here?" And just as I had that thought, and this man's name was Eric, he seemed like he was about early 40s, maybe mid 40s, I'm guessing. I didn't ask him his age either, because now I'm enthralled by it's a near-death experience story. You got to be kidding me. And he said, "I ended up out of my body, and I then, after assessing what was going on, felt myself being pulled away from this scene." And this is a classic kind of pattern of a near-death experience. I kind of went through this tunnel and ended up in this, what was just like a white space with this being there. And I'm like, "Oh." And he said, and then the being showed me that what I had been participating in terms of the Iraq war had been a byproduct of how I voted. And I'm like, "Okay, dude." And he said, "I got to see the karmic ripple of that vote, and it ended in me at this time dying." And he said it was like this, but it was also like I saw every element of it, from my family pressuring to vote for Bush the second time. And we were all Republicans, and it was very tribal. And I could feel in my heart at that time that wasn't what I really wanted to do. And yet I did. And I felt all the deaths I was part of, from both the US soldiers to contract workers to Iraqis to women and children, because I felt all of it like that. And it was just this instantaneous knowing of how I had been a co-creative part, and that's my language, of this whole entire war because of who I voted for, and my own injury and my own experience in that moment of hitting an IUD. And I hadn't noticed, but he was on a prosthetic leg. He had lost one of his legs, and then he's like, shows me his leg, goes, "Yeah, and this is always a reminder of that near-death experience." And what I realized was that, because I also felt this as well, that even when people don't vote, they vote. There's always this participation co-creatively that we can't help but be part of in life. And that's why we're here. And, I'm now starting to go, "You sound like me." And now I'm trying not to cry. And, and he said, "Ever since then, I've always voted from my soul, because I had an experience of seeing what voting does and can do in a democracy." And I'm kind of like, "Why are you even telling me this?" And now how do you, I wanted to ask, like, "So who did you vote for? How did you vote?" I did not. And he didn't offer it either, by the way. But he really was talking a lot about how the holism of the war. And as he told the story, he did not take sides. He did not blame like one side or the other. He spoke more from karmic fact, because that's what he was relaying. He was shown was this karmic fact that let's just go bigger than just voting. And this is me interpreting a bit, but we cannot but create here. Everything we do creates something. Vote, don't vote. And what he said was, what I realized is that you have to do the best you can within the circumstances and with the guidance of what your soul tells you. And he ended up back in his body, but not like back in his body in the tank. He ended up back in his body in a hospital, missing a leg. And so the gist of what he shared blew me away. And I want to offer that to you. And it was the source of a lot of what, obviously, heaven, universe, whatever, was queuing up me delivering this to you through that synchronistic meeting. And he never told me who he voted for this time. And he never even mentioned Democrat or Republican except to express what he reviewed. And that he said, I now make all choices politically independent of my family, any political tribe, because now I vote from having seen what we are empowered with our votes. I'm using some of my language here, to do in a democracy. So I consult my soul. And I, was really trying not to cry. And I said, so how do you feel about where we are as a country now? And he goes, I wish more people could see what I saw and thought like me and voted like me. And that was kind of it, really. And then it was back to dogs. And I wanted to share that with you. I made a move from being a Democrat to becoming an independent a decade ago because I could see the toxicity of political identities and sense where they had us and where they've taken us even now. So when it comes to where you are, what you're sorting out in yourself, and obviously there's more than just Venus is a very personal energy in us. I think this is a very unique moment in history and in our evolution, because it really is the pressure of both and personal and collective right now. Whether some people have jobs, whether we have forests left in the United States of America, whether we have democracy left, whether we have, a democracy that's running well and strong in the European Union. There's so much, and the thing that's not talked about in all of this that keeps on moving is climate change. We're so caught up in the chaos of our identities and their values and the illusion that these identities have power. A lot of these identities don't. And the power they have is not the power you want, unless you're a fan of the Death Star. So this is an unprecedented time. And I hope this helps give you some way to be in it, and in it in a way where you're in your light and you're in your power. Because here's what's up. Dark times like this, what's, if one could say, beautiful about them is that this is when stars come out. And they come out to shine. So let yourself be one of those stars. Let that be a guiding value. I want to be a star in the darkness. I want to be, because here's the thing, if we all light up, if we all step into the star, our birth star, if you will, which is another way of me saying our destiny, our reason for being here, amongst many reasons. If we all do that, if we all light up, we can light up the sky. And I will say, it's hard, but if we got into the values of the soul, no one is an enemy. Now, and we have to navigate those who do not move with compassion, kindness, grace, forgiveness, peace, love in their being. And what I want you to do, and this is a personal call from me, if you will, I want you to evaluate who is not moving in the world that way. And how do you do that? You don't do it through what they say. You do it through the patterns you see them living out. I have never personally once seen some of the people in power ever show kindness, genuine kindness, grace, forgiveness, compassion to those that are different, and admit they're wrong. Ever, like literally ever. And for some people in their entire life, I have not seen them do that. And I got into a discussion with someone online during the election cycle that was very pro-Trump. And I, of course, to be honest, did not vote for Donald Trump. But I said to this person, I said, anytime I get into engagements like this, I always go to their Instagram profile or Facebook profile. I want to see them. First of all, you could be a Russian bot. I don't know. And I want to see you as a person, not as the other enemy, but as a person. Because I'm going to talk to you as a person. I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going there. I can certainly get angry and mystically triggered about many things, and personally triggered. But at the same time, I have an honor code. I don't do name calling. You will not find me having done that online. You won't, because I don't do it. And this person came at me with name calling, and I said, I see that you follow Christ, but why aren't you living up to Christ's beautiful teachings and ideals? Why are you calling me names? I have not approached you with this. And he shifted. And he said, I'm sorry about that. And I just think that Trump really does care about this country. And I said, okay, can you cite for me one time, since you're a Christian, that Trump embodied and expressed the beautiful teachings and values of Christ? Can you actually give me an example of when you've seen him do that? Kindness, forgiveness, compassion, care, selfless service. And he literally could not find one. And nor could I. And I offer this not to get blowback from people who support him. This is actually what we need. We need to start looking at patterns in people and what they do with those patterns. If someone has lived a life where they've never been honorable, they dodged a draft, they disparaged decorated war veterans like John McCain, that needs to be noted. Yeah. Is that your value? It's not my value. It could be your values, but it's just not mine. And can we have values that let us move to real mature conversations about immigration and about other issues that are political, and not call names, and share in a sense of unity and vision for the well-being and equality of all? That to me just feels like the values of the soul. May not for other people, but it does for me. And if you align to the truest values of your soul, the way you'll know you're there is you're not going to lose power. You will have the resiliency to maintain your honor code, kindness, hopefully compassion, but be a truth teller. Stand up for and advocate for your truest values, and you're not going to get into shadow dances. With this guy that I engaged on Instagram, he ended up leaving the, if you will, exchange without commenting back because he couldn't. I asked him questions. I didn't accuse him of anything. I wanted to understand him. How can you follow Christ and yet pledge allegiance to someone who I've never seen embody any of the beautiful teachings and values of Christ? How can you explain to me how you do that? And I didn't say it from a put down, and he felt my energy. It was sincere. I wanted to understand because I could feel he was a really beautiful man with really heart-centered values in a lot of areas of his life. I could tell he loved his kids, but the political identity seemingly shut out light in this part of him and blinded his heart from being able to see. And that's where I think we are. So as you move forward from here, ask yourself, what are the values of my soul? What are the things I value that are actually bigger than just me and encompassing of an us? And am I in alignment with that? What's my honor code? What's my divine masculine Bushido knight warrior code? I just won't go to this. I won't do that. I don't care what they do. I'm not doing that. Do you have that in you? We're not encouraged to have that. Social media wants us to fight and call each other names and get all triggered and doom scroll and stay online. So I don't know. It's a great way to lose a lot of power and time. And I'm just offering, I think this Venus retrograde is bringing home, there is an absolute other way, but you're going to have to be countercultural, counterfamilial, counterpolitical, countersocial to get there. And I know you can. I know you want it. It's what we all in their deepest self want right now is an empowered self. And to be able to come back to the light of who we are, the light of life, and maintain that access to the grace grids of life, the light grids of life. These are not vampiric forces. They do not take power from others. They do not guide us to do that either. They don't. Do they guide us to stand up for the fight of holism and other people's value? Hell yeah. But if you think you're hearing an angel telling you, oh, call that person a repubtard or libtard or whatever horrific name you can, you think an angel's really going to tell you that? I mean, this veteran cleaned house with his journey of a near-death experience. And yeah. So take a drink of water here and close up. Sounds like I just did some kind of psychic surgery. Maybe I did. Don't cultivate darkness and know when you are. When you do, you'll lose power and you'll seek more power from others. When we cultivate darkness is typically a vampiric force. It's going to ask us to go take power from others to feel empowered. That is the essence of a bully. That is the essence of a dictator. That is the essence of a tyrant. And so we all have that in us, that capacity anyway. And I'm going to say, don't, just because others get dark, just because times are dark, please, for the love of the light, don't go under. Don't go dark. And become willing to, without judgment, but very compassionately, do an inventory on your honor codes or lack thereof, your values, what they really actually are, the identities running those, and then get to some hopefully conscious choices and shifts. That is the way forward to bring the healing. engagement is going to be crucial and in my view, non-optional. We're all affected now. We're all in this now. And everything I said in my guide, literally to the T, has happened. And there'll be more shared this weekend. So I have so much love for all of you, really. And if I triggered you, whatever, it truly comes from my soul and the deepest care I have for you as a person who does deserve freedom, individuality, equality, love, no matter what. And you, me, we all have value. It's our nature. We're enough. It's our nature. So let's light up and fight the good fight, and fight the good fight in ways where we do not lose our connection to the greater light. That's the beauty of what an honor code gives you. That's what brings a soldier into some miraculous courage to go to the front line and fight and not dodge any kind of draft, etc. Or run away from a fight that their soul does need to get in the mix of. So, my soldier, so much light and love to you, truly. Please, once again, join me this weekend, I hope, on Sunday. This is the time. Go to my website. The links are already in the video description. And I would appreciate any likes and shares you can offer to the video. Let's get the word out on a spiritual level of where we are and what this Venus retrograde in Aries and Pisces is about. Here's the diagram again. And I'll be talking more about it, far more about it actually, this coming weekend on Sunday. And I can't wait to talk about the midpoint with you, which is going to be on March 22nd, the Mars retrograde integration phase we're currently in, and recruit some other things in, like the eclipses and all the stuff that's already actually listed on the website. So I hope to see you there. I appreciate you. It's been wonderful to come back and teach you again. And I'm going to be teaching all of March, and I'm looking forward to it's just wonderful to be back in the zone. So much love. And until next time, love yourself no matter what. Be with yourself no matter what. We do have this. It's going to be hard. And we all got to light up. Or we might not have it, frankly. But I know we will. Namaste.